Like Israel, maybe you have never seen God's people this way. But to us, Hosea would say that we too are constantly under the threat of violence and war. But instead of running a bankrupt lover for whom no one would pay. So God called Hosea to portray his fractured relationship with Israel, to put God and Israel's broken marriage on public display. Hosea paid the marriage price for Gomer, a woman who embodied sexually foreign policy. Yet Hosea pledged his allegiance to her maritally. This was to be when God pledged his allegiance to Israel as a people and country, and when Israel vowed themselves to love God as a king, and God would prove his allegiance to his people by protecting them in his house. But what about when Israel continued to sleep around on their spouse? What about when Israel left the free political protection of God's house to sell herself to a foreign love? What about when she makes costly payments for military safety offered by the false lovers God had just freed her from? Would God divorce his bride? Would God break his marriage vows? What if his bride left him for another? What if she sold her allegiance to another spouse? The answer comes not in a display between husband and wife, but between parental whorings, steal from the tempest's earnings to fund her fearful yearnings. She indebted herself to other nations, other gods, other lovers, though they were frauds. In fear, she sold the allegiance her husband had bought. She pawned off her vows to buy a protection she'd already got. Shouldn't God's love lead to a holy anger? Shouldn't God's jealous wrath burn for his spouse? Shouldn't God divorce his bride? Shouldn't he break his marriage vows? But the good news of Hosea is that God will not ultimately let his bride walk out. For he will not give up his wife, no matter how far she's run down her adulterous path. The very thought makes his heart recoil within him, so he will buy her back. He will not execute his burning anger, because his compassion burns hotter than his wrath. But Hosea promised something must first come to pass. Israel's lovers would betray her. The arms she ran to for protection would raise up against her in attacks. Israel would collapse. In exile, God would abstain from Israel, separate from her because of her adulterous acts. She would be trapped by the very swords and chariots she paid for with her love and tribute, with her trust and tax. Jesus shows us that God will not divorce us. He will not break his marriage vows. Even though we left him for another, even though we sold our allegiance to another spouse. Jesus paid the marriage price for us. His blood buys back the safety we sold and gives us a home that can't be lost. For he renewed our vows and pledged his allegiance when he died for his whoring bride on the cross. Jesus is our King, our Master, our President, our Lord. But he is also the best lover and husband we can trust and adore. Jesus protects us in this new kingdom so we don't have to lust after other flags anymore. Jesus moved us back home with God. He made a beautiful wife out of a whore. So pledge your allegiance to Jesus, for he will protect us, even if we lose the kingdoms to which we offered our trust, even if we die under the armies and politics we've run after in lust. There is still a kingdom for us. Jesus will never give us up, no matter how far we've run down our adulterous paths. The very thought made his heart recoil within him, which is why he bought us back. On the cross, he extinguished his burning anger and showed that his compassion burns hotter than his wrath.